So we've discussed this topic on the left wing before, but we are living in a very unique time right now where sentiment over the economy and what is actually happening in the economy appear to be two separate things. Because if you look at the base standard metrics of economic success that we usually look at, like unemployment rate, GDP growth, these metrics all indicate that America is doing pretty darn well. I would go so far as to say that America has been one of the better economies at recovering from the pandemic, at least the heat of it that caused a lot of economic crisis. We are in a better place than a lot of our peer nations. And if you ask Americans about that, they're very likely to disagree. They're very likely to say that the economy isn't doing too hot right now. They're upset about the economy. And a lot of that is due to inflation and inflation of very important things like groceries and rent. However, the interesting thing about this is that if you ask Americans how their own personal finances are going for them, they're actually more likely to say they're good. In fact, 63% of Americans would rate their current financial situation as good, according to a poll by Axios, including 19% who say it's very good. Americans' outlook for the future is also pretty darn good, with 66% of them thinking that 2024 will be better than 2023. And 85% of Americans said that they would change their personal financial situation for the better in 2024. Now, we've talked about this conflict before, but it's interesting now we have some survey data to back up these sentiments that the way people view their own personal financial situation and the way people view the broader economy are very clearly different right now. And the question to that is why. Now, Liz, I want to go to you first because you'd said you want to know who these people are who view their personal financial situation as being pretty good. Now, I think that you and me being, of our generation, I don't know exactly how old you are, but I'm assuming you're in your 20s. I think that is a little bit different than the average American who's maybe 45, maybe owns a home. And like that's a different situation. But what were your thoughts when you heard this poll, Liz?
Well, I mean, and I wanted to confirm this too, but I was like, well, it's 62% of Americans that are living paycheck to paycheck. So my first thought was, who are they surveying? And it's 2,120 people that they surveyed over December 15th through December 17th of last year. And it's just, it seems interesting. I wouldn't describe my financial situation as anything like that. But I'm glad to hear those out of those
Good for them.
2,100 people, 63% of them. I have a decent platform on social media platforms. I'm willing to bet if I took a poll, people would say things very differently. But then, of course, the people who are coming across my content are probably in very similar situations. So it's interesting when we're looking at this data and we're reading this. People surveyed said that this is, how indicative is it really of our country's actual financial situation? But on that same note, we can say the same thing about the GDP, about the stock market. Are these actual tangible examples of how the average American is doing? No, not really.
So I mentioned this on a previous episode, Liz, but I completely agree with you that these polls are often misleading. For example, you mentioned the 65 Americans are living paycheck to paycheck, which
I think it's
is
62%.
62%, which is a poll.
Sorry.
They say they're living paycheck to paycheck, when really a lot of times they mean, yeah, no, I need this week's rent, but I own a home, I have assets. Like a lot of times that's not what that means. Because if you just think about it, more than 40% of Americans own a home. They're not really living paycheck to paycheck, right? So it's oftentimes these polls can be misleading and things. However, when we look at spending, consumer spending, it's going up. The amount of money that people are spending is increasing, which, you can say what people think and what people say they think. But generally, when people are spending more money, it typically is indicative of a better long-term outlook of the economy and of their personal finances. Now, I'm sure that some of that does come from the fact that things they have to spend money on, like grocery and their rent, are just higher, and so they have to spend more money. But I do think that there is a legitimate little bit of a disconnect, at least between what we traditionally view as the economy and what is good, and just how bad it is. Because I don't think we're in like a doomsday scenario right now, at least. For certain segments of America, for sure, homelessness is at an all-time high. That's terrible. But for the median American, it's definitely not, we're not living in 2008 right now, right? But a lot of people are treating it like it is. So I'm wondering if maybe the generation thing is playing a role here. Because I tend to agree with Liz personally about my own personal finances and about my general outlook. TJ, when you saw this poll, as someone you're older than us, you
Yeah,
probably
all
are in a
right.
better
So
financial
I'm
situation.
addressing that head
Go
on.
ahead.
John, I did not appreciate the subtle strays of the
No, no,
oh
no, not
yeah, those
so.
people who are
So many.
45 and own homes. Yeah,
Well, well,
okay, all right.
well,
I'm
well,
sitting right here.
TJ, I just have to say this because you look like you're our age. Like most of our audience
So
thinks we're the same age. So.
flattery will get you nowhere in this. I know that's not going to work. But okay, so I wanted to address a couple things on that. The first is like I kind of agree with the poll thing. Although like 2100 is a pretty solid poll number. That's pretty good as far as polls are concerned. Most of them are like 900 or 1100. So that's actually above and beyond. But the who is answering the questions, or I didn't actually look into like the age range of who was looking into that. As you guys didn't see it either, but I couldn't find it. But didn't look that hard. But
it was not easy enough for me to find, but I'm sure
exactly. Yeah, there's only so many.
I couldn't
You
find
look
it.
okay. All right.
Yeah, the information about who was surveyed just took me to a different
Yeah.
Axio poll, and I was like, okay.
Yeah, and so I reference this a lot with polls about the presidential election, which we talk about a lot here. And as everyone knows, I say it all the time that Biden's polls aren't great, but I think they're a worse reflection than what reality actually is. Which is a stunningly inarticulate way to say that. And it's not like me, but it's like the people who, and we have data from this going back the last two elections that Democrats have overperformed in the elections by an average of like 9 or 10 points in the last two. And I have no evidence on this, but I have a strong suspicion that the people who take the time to answer polls are older people and probably more financially stable and bored, have nothing to do. Like when is the last time if we had asked 1,023-year-olds, when's the last time you answered the phone from a number you didn't recognize? Like, no, you're not doing that. Like, fuck you, not happening. So the people who are used to doing that are people, my age and older. And so they're more likely to be kind of stable. Although I do want to ask a question because, John, something you said kind of confused me about the paycheck to paycheck thing, about like what living paycheck to paycheck actually means. Because that was the incongruence that I ran into as well, because I didn't know the exact number like Liz did, that a solid chunk of Americans said that they're living paycheck to paycheck. But according to this poll, half of the respondents said they would be okay if they lost their job. I don't know anybody who can say that. Like and John, you mentioned that because I assumed that living paycheck to paycheck just meant that, hey, if I don't get paid this next week or this in the next 2 weeks, I can't pay the stuff that I need to survive, my rent, my food, my insurance, and all that. And I have no real assets that I can sell to, offset that cost. And you mentioned home ownership, but I don't think most people own their homes outright. I don't know the numbers on that, but I would be surprised if the majority of people actually have equity that they can cash out in their houses. So what do we mean living paycheck to paycheck? Because that's what I always thought.
Yeah, so I would be better prepared if I knew this question was coming. I didn't know Liz would bring up that question, but I have actually been looking into this a lot recently, so I don't have solid data numbers for you, but I'm pretty darn sure the median American has about $5,000 in liquid assets. So like, yes,
like a car,
I know
or something.
yes, they could easily.
Older people.
That exactly, but see, this is the thing. Like something that very much biases a lot of our opinions is that all of my peers are like 40 and younger, and anyone who's older than that, they're like my older family members and bosses. So like from my perspective, when I'm looking at this, it's like, oh God, like no one has that. Like I mean, I do, but like I have $5,000 in savings I can spend, and if I have it, then like I imagine that like a lot of other people my age also have it. I don't always have it, but it kind of depends on my job situation. But it is like not actually that hard to acquire in America $5,000. Can you live 6 months on $5,000? Hell no. But you can probably live a month, depending on what your rent is, what your groceries are. If you have a large family, you know, if you have $5,000 in the bank, you can probably get through the next month. And if you can
John, how old are you?
I'm 27.
27. I would be amazed if your average 27-year-old had $2,000
I'm not.
saved up.
I'm not. I'm definitely
Amazed. Like,
in the upper
that would,
quartile
yeah,
of
holy shit. That
27-year-olds,
would,
but of Americans, not so much. Because what you have to understand is like the demographics of this country are so weighted to the top. Like there's so many old people and
Mhm.
so few young people.
Okay. All
And
right.
so
That's
when you
interesting.
talk about me, even
Okay.
like you talk about how averages get skewed by big outliers, and that's true, but the medians get skewed by an overabundance of old people who have had an entire lifetime to have some level of savings, who
Yeah.
have probably acquired some assets that they could sell off if need be. So like when people answer the response, hey, if I got laid off from my job, they don't think they'll be off the job market. They don't think they'll be on the job market too long. They right now unemployment is really low. And that isn't necessarily indicative of the time it takes to get a new job. But in general, sentiment in the economy is that we're in a pretty fluid job market right now. And a lot of statistics will back that up. So when people answer that question, like, oh, well, if I get laid off, I could survive for a month, and then I'll probably get a new job. But they also then go, oh, well, I am living paycheck to paycheck because I gotta work, or
Mhm.
eventually I'm screwed. You know, they might not be thinking about it in terms of like X amount of time, but they're like, yeah, no, like I'm living paycheck to paycheck. If I don't get paid, you know, twice in a row, I'm gonna have a lot of problems. Um, but if they get on unemployment insurance and you know get a job in the reasonable amount of time they expect, they know they'll be okay. And I think that that speaks to the difference in the answers to those two questions. But you guys are totally right. Like the way you ask these questions in these polls very much change how people are going to answer them. And the other interesting thing that I came across when looking at this is that your political affiliation also changes it. Now, both Republicans and Democrats are guilty of thinking the economy is better when their party is in office, right? That's true across the board. But Republicans are actually 2.5 times stronger of a reaction. So whatever a Democrat will say about +6. It'll be +6 percentage points higher that Democrats will rate the economy on a scale of 1 to 100 when a Democrat is president. Uh, it was like 24 points higher, something like that, for Republicans. So that is another thing right now that there's a lot of Republicans out there who their personal finances might not be all that bad, but they're going to rate the economy terribly just because they're watching Fox News and Joe Biden is in office. That was another interesting thing I came across in this research. Liz, what are your thoughts?
Oh, I have a lot of thoughts that don't seem to coincide with the data that you're reading. You know, I'm 23, so I'm a little bit, you know, younger. A lot of my friends are around that age. And what the issues that we're running into, both those of us that have degrees and those of us that don't, those of us that are in trades, is just an oversaturation in almost every market.
Mhm.
I've
Mhm.
had friends that have been applying for jobs for months with very little responses, callbacks, any of it. And this is again friends with degrees and friends without. Um, so, you know, while unemployment rates are low, I'd be interested to see the percentage of people that have multiple jobs at, you know, at the same time. Um, it's just it's almost like there are, I mean, of course, there's different levels to the economy, but it's almost like Americans are living in two separate Americas, because there are so many people that are just in objective poverty. Um, and so, you know, hearing that the majority of Americans would rate the economy great when the majority of people I know are really struggling, it just seems like there's a disconnect. Because, you know, and we talked about generational gaps here, but COVID, it put a pause on a lot of things. And then when, you know, because obviously COVID is not over, but when corporations decided that COVID was over, and this is true with the last topic that we talked about, everything started to skyrocket except for wages. And
Mhm.
so a lot of people our age are struggling a little bit more than maybe those older who do have those savings. So it's very interesting to see how everybody is reacting differently to where the economy is now. Inflation the past couple of years has definitely been hitting myself and those of us around my age gap and my financial status pretty hard recently. Just
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
and unfortunately, I mean, this is true for every at-risk demographic that the the more a demographic suffers from the economy, the less likely they are to vote. And so it's like it's a snake eating its own tail with this thing going on here. And I'm glad you brought up the metrics of unemployment, Liz, because one of my many pet peeves is the metrics we use to show that the economy is strong aren't good metrics at all. And unemployment is right. It can be an indicator that things have absolutely fallen apart. If unemployment is at 17%, like it's over. Like it's just awful. But if it's super low, that doesn't mean life is great for everybody. It doesn't. Like it's not a good indicator at all. So yeah, I don't know. That was an interesting poll, John, you sent out. I wasn't expecting that, but I want to look more into that because it intrigues me.
I think this is a topic that we are going to be coming back to often on this show because what Liz said about how something just isn't adding up, I think that's very true. And I think we're going to find out what that something is in the coming months and years because there's a certain group of Americans that are doing really well, and there's a certain group of Americans that are not doing well at all. And if you just look at the medians and the average metrics, it's not going to show you just how much of a struggle is just how much of a strain is being put on many Americans. If you look, as I said earlier, you look at the median age is something like in the 40s and the 50s. So you look at the average, the median person in the 40s or 50s, they're probably, more likely than not going to be able to survive if they're laid off from their job. They're probably not going to go homeless. They're probably not going to, go into bankruptcy. Like probably. Are there many of them that still will? Yes, of course. If you talk to someone who's 25, that's not the fucking case. Like they very well, if they don't have the support of their parents, are utterly screwed. And I
Mhm.
think that's the reason why you see increase in consumer spending, these broad indicators of economic health, while also having terrible indicators of economic downturn, such as uh, the highest homeless rate that we've ever seen in this country, at least in modern times, such as the general sentiment that things are not going well right now. And there are people who will tell you that that's because the numbers are a lie and they're wrong and everything is shit. And there are people who will tell you no, that what people feel is wrong and the numbers are completely right. And I think the answer is somewhere in the middle. And I think we're going to spend a lot of time trying to figure out exactly what the real answer here is. So if you want to know more, definitely continue watching us here on the left wing. And thank you for taking the time to watch us. All right, guys, if you made it this far, that means you've made it to the end of the video, and we could not thank you enough. You don't even understand how much that helps the algorithm. And I'm sure one of the reasons that you made it this far is because you loved hearing from our amazing guest, Liz. And I want to throw it to Liz here so she can tell you where you can hear from her when she's not here on the left wing.
Thank you guys again so much for having me on. In all of my socials, I have my link tree, but you can find me on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and TikTok under All About Liz. That's ALLBOUTLIZ. All About Liz.
Thank you, Liz. Folks, if you liked what you saw, and of course you did, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, share with your family, friends, loved ones, enemies. I don't care. Just share it with everybody. It's going to help us out a lot, and you'll see it more in the algorithm. Like, just do it, folks. It's quite literally the least you could do.